Everybody, happy Friday. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. Of course, a disappointing week for Norwich City on the pitch. A chance to put it right tomorrow with the trip to Hull. Looking forward to that. Joined by Paddy Davitt and Connor. Southwell for your preview show. Of course, we're looking ahead to that game. We'll talk a little bit about the season tickets and various other things as we make our way through this show. Of course, we want your comments, predictions, questions. Get them all down below and we'll work through those later on in the show. Gents, I think probably the place to start is a theme of this season. The midfield curse has struck again. Kenny McLean going to be a bit of a doubt as well for tomorrow. Of course, he was named in the squad for Tuesday, withdrew during the team warm-ups. Johannes suggesting it was a sort of breathing-related issue and he's maybe struggling a little bit with that. Feels like he's probably not going to be involved tomorrow. And then, of course, the other blow is Marcelino Nunez back involved. Obviously got the start last weekend, came off in that game, came on, sort of reversed to Slimani on Tuesday night. Here's the image that our good photographer Paul Cheston took on Tuesday of that gash after the tackle from Ledson. Johannes saying yesterday, pretty swollen, not able to train, not able to play, so not going to be involved on Saturday's trip to Hull. Of course, probably a blessing that it's not broken, which is kind of the only seed of joy, I suppose, from that situation. So just feels like we're back to sort of that midfield issue again, Paddy.
Yeah, I mean, it is off the dial. I mean, it feels like every season there's something. I remember one season with centre-backs, wasn't it? There seemed to be residual issues with centre-backs, and I'm sure there's other positions people could throw in. But it's felt like, you go through these periods, but even allowing for that, this feels like it's off the scale and it's relentless. You get through, what was it, only now 3 or 4 games ago where Johannes is leaving out Jakob Sorensen after the Watford start. And you think, right, okay, that's behind them now in terms of, a squad that is made up of counting the bodies rather than selection and deselection, to use his phrase. And not all that many games thereafter, and we're back here again. And probably in many respects as brutal, zoning in on the centre mid scenario as it's been all season, really. If potentially you go to Hull and you've got no Nunez, we know definitely no McLean, that's probably in the balance, and now no Marcondes. Well, really, those are probably three, and along with Slimani, your 4 central first choice centre mids. So to be without 3 of them underlines really what a terrible run. And like Johannes said yesterday, he towards the end of that presser, that it's hard for him even to stay positive because he, as he said, to paraphrase him, he wants the successes to come quicker and that momentum to continue when they have harnessed it. And because of these issues, he talked about, not having a Chilean midfielder available for any length of time because of the various issues around Nunez's fitness. You could throw McLean in there if you had Bolt in the disciplinary games that he missed, and now this feels like a respiratory sort of related issue. It is really hampering that when they have, as they have recently, 2 points were they, and 2 games, two positions, from the top 6 were in the top 6 up until Derby's equaliser, and that was only last weekend. It feels quite longer than that, but to go from that to now, it's holding pattern again, and in many respects, I'm sure they feel internally as a result of nothing that they are doing, really. Nunez, that's a very, very poor challenge. You picture you've thrown up there shows what a poor challenge it was. And that's, I know there's been a debate at times about, is this load issue with certain players and certain injuries, and could they do something to mitigate that? But when Nunez throws himself into a challenge and the lad does likewise and catches him above the ball, he might have been attempted to win the ball, but he ended up hitting him up that leg, as you saw from the bloodied sock. So if you're Johannes, what can you do? That is out of his hands. Likewise, McLean, whatever he's contracted, that is, as a head coach, really frustrating because those 2 particularly are frontline players and so key within a Torok template to how he wants to move that ball through the back to front. And to be without of those again, potentially tomorrow, certainly makes the task much tougher. And it's just frustration all round. We saw elements of that. We might get into that, with that minor flashpoint to keep it in perspective that, involved Johannes and Borja at the end of the game midweek and 1 or 2 fans who were clearly disgruntled. And they're right to be because, it feels like when they're on the cusp of maybe having a bit of a leap forward, they regress, and that isn't solely down to injuries. You can't excuse that the Derby and the Preston performance wasn't good enough, whatever the mitigation. So it all adds up to, a little bit of frustration when it felt 2-3 games ago that, okay, right, they're set there now. They've got Sargent back. They're clear of those injuries. Fixtures looked favourable, famous last words, and on we go. And unfortunately, it's gone the other way.
Yeah, Paddy mentioned settled lineups there, Connor. I know you put some sort of statistics around the midfield and the fact that Norwich haven't been able to sort of field a consistent three all season in our group chat this morning. I don't know if you've got them right in front of you now, maybe just to paint the picture, I suppose, for those supporters about the amount of rotations they've had to do in that area of the field this season.
I do have them in front of me, and it is a little bit mad, to be honest. And for all of the talk of Josh Sargent and maybe even Borja Sainz missing, this has maybe felt like, as Paddy said, their Achilles heel this season. They haven't been able to get any sort of consistency or rhythm or continuity in those three midfield positions. Jacob Wright is the 11th different central midfielder that they've played in those three positions this season. And that midfield three against Preston on Tuesday, so Wright, Slimani, Schwartau, that was their 16th combination in 32 games. So we're basically talking about a different combination playing in every other championship game. It's absolutely mad, really. The fact that they've essentially got a whole starting 11 of central midfielders, but very few of them have been fit and available. You look at kind of the three players with the most starts, Slimani, McLean and Nunez, with 6. But in terms of three that have played consecutively the most, you have to go right back to the start of the season, and you're looking at Forson, McLean and Nunez with 4 games in a row. That is what they've been able to do this season. And Paddy sort of mapped it out there. I think when we think of Norwich City's best midfield three, we think of McLean in that middle position, who offers the stability. You've got Nunez, who's almost the metronomic figure in there. And then you've got Marcondes, who's almost the conduit between their deeper spells of possession and sort of feeding the attacking players with opportunities. Well, they've only started 3 times as a trio this season, and Norwich have won 2 of those games. So, yeah, it's insane. But I think we're looking more at that McLean Nunez trio in particular. I've got some stats around that as well. So they've played together in 14 of Norwich's 32 championship matches. Of those 14, Norwich have won 6, drawn 5 and lost 3. So that's 23 of their 43 points have come in those 14 games where McLean and Nunez have played. You compare that to the 18 where they haven't, and Norwich have won 5, drawn 5 and lost 8. So that might be that one has played and one's not been available, or both of them have missed. And actually, of the 5 games that neither of them have started, Norwich City have won 0 of them. So that bodes well heading to Hull tomorrow, if it is the case that none of those are available. And it goes to show, I think, that ultimately, to do anything in football, and I've had sort of a bit of a look back at the 2021 season. Skip played 45 games, McLean played 38 games, but was available for a lot more than that. You have to have continuity and rhythm, because particularly the way that Norwich play football, possession heavy, they want to dominate the ball, they want to dominate and have control of the game. You have to have a settled, coherent midfield to do that. And when it's constantly chopping and changing, and you've got players who are operating in different roles within that team, it's very difficult to establish that control. But then it also bleeds into other aspects of performance. So the defensive phases of play, what they do out of possession, the way that they press, how they operate from an attacking perspective, all of that is sort of brought together by the midfield. And if you've got 3 different bodies in there every week unable to play consistently, it's probably little wonder as to why this team is perhaps so inconsistent at the moment.
Yeah, sort of tough to know a solution, I suppose, around this, Paddy. Do you put this down to workload? Is it just a bit of unlucky, in terms of Norwich maybe not getting the rub of the green with sort of certainly the Nunez injury? Obviously, it's a contact injury within the game. Is it a sports science related problem? Where do you sort of put this sort of issue, I suppose, where do Norwich are trying to address it, I suppose, moving forwards? Because it's clearly an issue. And next season, if they want to try and kick on in wherever they're going to be, it feels like this could be an Achilles heel for them, consistently having to deal with this.
Yeah, I think the reality is you have to go case by case and rather than broad brushstrokes. And Giannis, when he has been asked, is there things that are within their control as opposed to like a Nunez challenge of a night, which isn't really. And he said, yes, we will have to get under the bonnet of that, and maybe that might be something that beyond the end of the season, that all the relevant actors in that space, in sports science and the medical teams and the physio staff, have to try to move it forward, because while you can see with a Núñez type of injury that's clearly just something that is out of the control of anybody connected to Norwich, really. That's just a poor challenge that, and it's obviously us from the outside talking about this. We're not party to the intricacies of what the support plans are for a Forsyth, for a foursome, for those two injuries, for example. Núñez prior to, with the hamstring issue that kind of he had initially, then he came back, then he had it again. Liam Gibbs, which Johannes did touch on yesterday. As he said, Liam Gibbs is now 3 periods out from this time last season onwards. Liam Gibbs, I think, in the last On the Ball documentary was a very revealing interview, I thought, from the club, where he talked about that this latest rehab is not so much treating the current injury or the last injury, it's building his body up, the surrounding areas of the body. All of that, are justifiable questions about, do they need to look at their processes? I'm sure they do anyway, but does this just not underline the point that, Forsyth, there's another example. There's a guy who very poor challenge, which occurred with the initial injury down at Cardiff. And that's, again, out of Norwich's control as far as I would be concerned. But why are we now still at this point where whatever they've tried in terms of treatment hasn't worked? He hasn't really responded. He's still reporting pain when he tries to put any load through it or tries to up the intensity of his training. And now we're back in the injection cycle. This is the third of 3 weeks of injections. And then Johannes again yesterday said it to me as well on pre-Preston. If this period of injections doesn't work, they're going to have to look at something else again and try and look at a different treatment plan. Forsen, they're draining that knee and the blood's returning, to paraphrase Johannes. All of these things, we can't really talk with any great insight because we're not inside these departments and we're not party to what they feel is the issues and what they're trying to work through and maybe some of the challenges. Each player clearly is an individual in their own merit in terms of how they respond to treatment and how their body responds to it. But I think it would be remiss, and that's not certainly anything that you get from how Napa conducts himself or Torup, that they would overlook that there may be issues that they need to address internally over and above. Clearly, football is a contact sport, and you are going to pick up football-related injuries in games and in training because that's the nature of it. It's a contact sport. But I think it's got to the point now that it clearly does need, some forensic analysis of what is happening, because we know the infrastructure there is best in class at Colney. There's absolutely no issues or excuses that could be had in terms of they've got every treatment plan they need to get these players through what is a very grueling championship schedule. But the recovery tools they've got, the ability to hopefully rehab quicker from injuries, which was what we were told was, the last edition, that recovery and fitness pool would help this scenario where you've got a player who's injured and can they fast track a little bit that recovery process? Well, there's lots of cases this season where that doesn't feel it's the case. And as I say, that's us from the outside, maybe not party to all the evidence, certainly not of a medical disposition that we can opine about it. But the reality is Johannes Torup is without multiples of players for lengthy periods of time. And if you're Ben Napa, I'm sure you're going to be looking at that as we move forward.
Yeah, last one sort of on the midfield, Connor. There's a few people in the comments sort of, I suppose, sharing a few opinions and views on it. Peaky saying deepest concern for me was the balance in the team. McLean and Emmy obviously experienced without those in the team. So obviously, yeah, aside from Duffy, it was a very inexperienced team. On Tuesday night, Ryan saying the rest of the lads must love McLean. They all go on strike and refuse to play football without him. Peaky felt for Wright as baptism of fire meant no player really to lean on within the game. And Jack sort of mentioning whether, Deji might potentially get an opportunity in the midfield. I mean, of those available options tomorrow, I believe there's 4 with Jakob Sorensen and Svartal, Slimani and Wright, which of course were the 3 that started at Preston. How do you see Torup approaching it tomorrow? Obviously a difficult place away at Hull. They're sort of fighting for their lives at the bottom. Do you see Sorensen coming in for Wright? What did you make of his debut, kind of that midfield balance for tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the first point I would make, and this sort of lends on to what Paddy was speaking about, we talk about maybe the ones that aren't available, but it's also the effect it has on the ones who are available. You look at Marcondes, for example, he's been playing in the last few weeks with a hip issue. Jakob Sorensen came back from injury in November and was forced basically to start and to up his load significantly quicker than anyone sort of anticipated. You look at, Jacob Wright is a good example, someone who signed from Manchester City, who in an ideal world they'd probably want to ease in and give minutes to from the bench and build up slowly. Instead, we're probably talking about him making his second start tomorrow after what was, a difficult night. And I think it was hard not to feel sorry for him, because there's clearly been a limited amount of training time that he's had since joining Manchester City. That is a very specialised role in terms of what Johannes Torp wants from that number 6, about how they need to play, about the type of positions that they need to take up for some of their defenders, but also some of the players ahead of them. And it's the real linchpin of how Norwich City play in possession. So it's not a role that you can just be dropped into 20 minutes before kickoff and expect to pick up seamlessly, I don't think. And the fact we saw against Derby, Nunez probably struggled with it, and the overall composition in the midfield not looking quite right when he made that change impacts that as well. So I think it's twofold really on those points. It's the players that aren't here, but it's also the ones that are. And Paddy's right, we don't have the knowledge to really question it, and because we don't know enough about it and we don't have enough insight on it. But I think where you are is you sort of need to ask questions on it and where they're at with it, because Paddy's right, is that there are some of them that are contact injuries that you can't do anything about. But when Liam Gibbs is doing the same injury 8 minutes after a rehab, I think it is right that you don't need a sports science background to really ask questions about that and whatnot. And the football that Norwich play, statistically, you look at sort of the charts and the numbers, it is amongst the most intense in the Championship. So there is naturally an increase to injuries there as well. I guess similarly to what Tottenham are experiencing in the Premier League at the moment when you play such an intense style of play. In terms of the balance for tomorrow, I think we'll see Sorensen start. You look at the Watford game and how that gave them a little bit more stability, and I could actually see them sort of moving towards a bit more of a 4-2-3-1, in terms of formation, just to help Jacob Wright out a bit and to prevent that sort of single pivot from being a little bit more of a double one. And then I think you could have a Schwartau or a Slimani ahead of them and certainly look to be a little bit more robust. That would probably be the way that I would expect him to go away from home, albeit against a team that hasn't won at home since, I think, December the 21st or something. So I think it'll be more about stability and shoring them up and trying to do it that way. In terms of JJ, I think, and we've seen this season, if there is a teenager that is good enough to be playing, they would be playing. So with him, the sort of judgment at the moment is that he's not ready to play, and certainly from the elements that I've seen of him, I think there's work to do technically in some of the positions to really be able to be a Championship competitor on a regular basis. It's going to be difficult now for him because there are options ahead of him of a similar age, Schwartau 18 and Wright 19, etc. So he's got to plan his pathway, and it's going to happen a little bit later for him if it does happen. But no, I don't foresee that being a real outcome. I then think that probably allows them to, with that free, then have Schwartau on the bench and maybe to go a bit more attacking if they need to later on in terms of the overall balance of it. So, I could see it being a bit more of a flat 2, which was kind of what it was against Watford. It was more of a McLean and Sorensen in tandem rather than that sort of 1 with 2 ahead that we've seen at Carrow Road, where they've tried to get 2 players a little bit closer to some of their attacking players. But I think given some of the structural challenges that they had, particularly against Derby, slightly different the other night in terms of, I think, their intent and, players being dropped into stuff that they weren't really comfortable with. And, Oscar Schwartau, for example, having to play centrally when, he's probably having to play there a lot more than he anticipated, than Torp anticipated. And that is being forced rather than something that they've been able to do organically because of the situation that we speak about. So, it's got to be a balance that they've got to get right. And that I would expect would include Jakob Sorensen after what he did against Watford. And, for all of sort of the talk of him being dropped out, I thought he was pretty good that day. Just in terms of the stability that he brought Norwich and away from home, that can be really valuable. So they're probably the 3 that I'm thinking, providing, of course, Kenny McLean doesn't get through, which he may not at this stage.
We spoke about the lack of options in the midfield, but in terms of the wide areas, Paddy, it feels like they do have more options now relative compared to sort of before the window. Of course, the arrival of Lewis Dobbin, we saw Matej Jurasek come on the pitch at Carrow Road, some pretty good moments, certainly after he grew into the game. I know he struggled initially when he first came on, but I think there was enough there for fans to get excited about. In terms of him, in terms of Dobbin, in terms of Signs, how do you see Torp going tomorrow? Because obviously Signs got his full 90 against Preston, and certainly before that game, Torp was intimating he wasn't going to play him for the full 90. Obviously, the game dictated in the way it played out, he had to. So, in terms of tomorrow, which 2 would you expect to see in those wider areas?
Well, Science Chewing, he has to play him now. Start him every single game, because I thought he grew into the game. I mean, he almost did another headline grabber there with that shot that was just deflected wide. I think it was stoppage time. If not, it was in the last minute of normal time. In those areas where he's been so devastating prior to off the field issues, should we say, or certainly off the field sanctions from elements on the field. But yeah, I liked it. He injected some dynamism. There was a few lovely balls he took in and rolled the defender and got them going again through the pitch. And he just, for me, is that clearly he's their standout wide player. So he has to start from here to the end of the season when fit, when available. Sargent is a shoe-in, obviously. Hopefully we're still not in, although you fear it will be the case, that we're in this 60-minute, 75-minute management mode and he comes off again. If that is the case, that might impact where he sees Cernach fitting into the mix, i.e. from the bench initially, which would then, probably slightly too soon maybe for Jurasic, although I thought, again, he showed some nice glimpses that he could offer. I mean, he had some of the deliveries on that left peg, and there was one he put in on his right, which were, if Sargent had been on the pitch, I'd like to have seen how that had played out. So I wouldn't be surprised if he went Jurasic, but I just think, given we've just come off the back of a debate about that central midfield is going to be a little bit mend and make do, it feels like. So if you're having to go with that further down the side, then you probably err on the side of maybe Dobbin, which is basically essentially the setup he went with from the start on Tuesday night. But Sargent was so isolated that they will need to be better, certainly progressing the ball than they were. And obviously Yannis was asked about that yesterday, about maybe there was an idea they could go longer and get the service into those players. It clearly didn't work, and I think he more or less said it would be a reversion to what we more associate with Yannis in terms of how he wants to progress the ball, and I think that would suit a front three of Science, Sargent and Dobbin, with obviously you got Jurasic and Cernach to throw into the mix.
Yeah, you mentioned that clip about the long balls. I'm going to play that now, and we'll talk a little bit maybe about whether that's a learning curve for Yannis Oftorop.
I think something a lot of people picked up on was maybe the number of sort of long balls or the more direct attempts. Was that something that you picked up? Or So what did you make of that? Were you unhappy with that?
No, because it was kind of the approach, and every decision we take is down to me. So when we don't get it right, it's down to me. And I think what we tried to do was to create a bit more open game compared to the Derby game. See if we could make it a little bit more back and forth with all the risk that comes with that, because then, players can be vulnerable in situations that have to defend big spaces for themselves. But on the other hand, it could also create a game picture for us where we could bring the ball into the box a little bit earlier and create some moments in and around the box a little bit earlier than compared to the Derby game. So that was the approach, but I don't think we managed to get that balance right, because of course still you need to do some passes, and still you need to work yourself closer to the box, and you cannot only bring direct passes, and that balance was not right on the day.
Yeah, clear accountability there from Yannis Oftorop for what he felt he got wrong on Tuesday night, Connor. But you could sort of sense that fan frustration, during the game, after the game. We obviously saw the scenes Paddy alluded to at the start with signs going over to the fans, and it didn't feel like a Torp template. So do you think that's going to be a learning curve for him moving forwards? Obviously, still his first season in the Championship, still getting to grips with learning the league and the teams and the setup of the players he has available to him. So learn from this, I suppose, mistake he's made on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a mistake because, when you think of a project and trying to get buy-in for that, it's key that you are clear and you show people fundamentally that you believe in what you're trying to do and how you're trying to play. And clearly this wasn't, a Portsmouth style abandonment of that. It was a very deliberate kind of trying to, because I think of the way Preston pressed them and they got it right and did it so effectively. That was where the space was. I think that's probably what forced them, and some of the elements that we spoke about in terms of a bit of a disruptive midfield that probably forced them to go a bit longer. But actually I wanted them to be a little bit braver on the ball. I wanted to see them try and play through Preston, and you almost forgive then if they make errors and they make mistakes, as opposed to maybe some of what they did on Tuesday night, which did feel like a step away from what they're trying to build. And ultimately, when times get difficult and players become unavailable, if you're going to switch every time, I think it's very difficult then to ask the fan base to stay with you, if I'm honest, because if you are hired to, and you've spoken about trying to implement a certain style of play, then do it and prove that you believe in it. And that's, easy. It's easy in the good moments when you're winning and you're beating Plymouth 6-1 and you're putting 4 against Watford and Hull. It's harder in the moments where you've got players unavailable and there's a little bit of pressure and people are looking at you as favourites. Go and win this game. But actually, that's when you need to see it more than anything else. On the flip side of that, there is good that there's a pragmatism there, and the two have to work in tandem. And I think ultimately he is right. I think the balance was off because Norwich have used at points. I remember early on in the season they used Antti Sienats as a bit of an outball on the right, where teams really got their press right, and Gunn often or a central defender would clip it into him, and because typically fullbacks are a little bit shorter than centre backs, that kind of worked for them a little bit. I think it's a little bit of a concern what we've seen in the last week with particularly playing sides who sit in a low block, absolutely, but more so in a 3-5 block. That's something that Norwich have proven over 2 games they find very difficult to break down and construct opportunities against. And I think that long term is a concern, particularly when I think we're going to see a lot of it at Carrow Road in the coming month or so. Teams are going to come to Carrow Road and defend and give Norwich City the ball. They need to be a lot better at finding solutions that aren't just going long, and because it's not really Josh Sargent's game, to be honest. He can do it. He's not bad with his back to goal, but he's not he's not somebody who wants to hold it up necessarily, and he's not someone who's going to get sort of back in and build and build play and bring others into play. He's not that. He's a good link player. It's not his strongest asset. So yeah, I think it's good to hear some sort of self-reflection that he and his coaching staff got that wrong. It's always easy in hindsight to say that's the case. If Norwich go and execute it and they win because of crosses and because of headers, then I think most people don't really care, maybe the style. But yeah, I think personally from an ideological perspective, it's not really ideal when you're trying to sell a style of play and implement a style of play to then pivot away from that so dramatically as maybe they have done at points in the last few months. So pros and cons to it, but hopefully, as he said, that's a realization now to go back at what they're trying to do and to do that better rather than maybe worrying about trying to be a little bit more multi-dimensional, because I think you just cause confusion really. And if I'm a player and I think we've all played, I'm sure we've had it under not as good coaches as Johannes, where they've told you to do something and then 10 minutes into a game it gets abandoned because it's not going well. I think as a player you turn around and say, well, what are we doing here? What do we believe in? What are we trying to do to win a game? So at a point where he is trying to build a style of play, I think it's wrong to move in that step. And yeah, it's good to hear him sort of admit pretty openly that it was an error, I think.
Yeah, the beauty of the Championship is the games come thick and fast. Chance to put it right tomorrow, of course. With that, Hull City are the team that Norwich are visiting. Had a pretty difficult season, in the bottom 3 at the moment. A 2-0 defeat to Burnley during the week. They had a change of manager throughout the season. Of course, when they arrived at Carrow Road in October time now under Tim Bolter, Norwich winning 4-0 on that occasion. They looked very open. Norwich cut through them pretty easily. They've had the switch now. Ruben Sellers, of course, formerly at Reading, arriving. I think they've had a little bit of an improvement, but their home record is poor, the worst in the division, 24th on that table, just 2 wins all season. Of course, we saw Abu Kamara make that move, maybe struggled a little bit for his form. So what have you made of Hull so far this season, Paddy? Because it feels very different to last season where we went to the MKM in January and they'd unveiled Carvalho and they had Philogene in that team and they were trying to vie for the playoffs with Norwich. Norwich obviously managed to pit them to 6th. I think they finished 7th or 8th that season. So they feel in a very different place to them.
Yeah, and obviously what changed from that point to now is, they've changed again on the head coach front, but to let go of Rosinha from afar seemed a very strange decision because they looked like they did have something. And as you say, they were able to bring in 1 or 2 high quality loan players as well. But there was a style, there was a lovely fluidity to how they progressed the ball. I know, Norwich did get the win that night, didn't they? But Angus Gunn played out of his skin. And really, on the balance, Norwich were very fortunate to come away with the 3 points. If you were just watching that game, that was a team in a very cohesive way under a young head coach who, to take Connor's previous point, like Torp, very clearly identifiable style, identity, what he wanted from that group of players, and they were clearly buying into it. Okay, they fell short in terms of the top 6. But then, and again, we're not party to, was it Rosinha maybe looking at pastures new, or from everything you piece together, it looks like it was more a club-based decision to get to dispense with his services. He's now subsequently gone off to France and is doing what he's doing in Ligue 1. But the grass isn't always greener, as that saying goes, because Tim Volter came in and they were so open at Carrow Road, that 4-0 game. It was off the chart how open they were, and obviously that was not policy that was going to get them the results, because I'm sure their owner, very ambitious owner, isn't he, that Turkish gentleman, he would, off the back of what Rosinha did, it was almost, I'm sure he was thinking, we've got the platform now to be this club in top 6 contention, and it's completely tanked the other way. And as we say, at kick-off tomorrow, they're in the bottom 3. That clearly wasn't, when you're going out and committing the sums they did for players like Abu Kamara, it wasn't to fight off relegation. So something has gone badly awry. Funny enough, my good friend of mine, he's from Coventry days. His lad, he lives up in York now, and his lad's in Hull's. He's a first-year pro at Hull, actually. He's just out on loan at the minute. And he tells me that they really like Celes. The players have bought into what he's trying to do. Fan base are behind it as well. But clearly he's trying to turn around something that he inherited, a little bit like maybe Giannis did when he took it over from Wagner. The difference being, of course, he's trying to do this in the middle of the season. And you just look at the last month, to take 4 points from Leeds and Sheffield United, given how difficult Norwich found to lay a glove on either of those recently, tells you there is something to work with there under this head coach and that group of players. But as you rightly pointed out, Adam, the last 2 home games, you've lost to QPR, you've lost to Stoke. And they're in the bottom 3. So clearly it feels like at this stage that he's trying to, maybe a little bit like Cifuentes at QPR, there's a period of adaptation and it's a bit bumpy and a bit turbulent, and there's good results and good performances, but there's also the other side as well. And I guess that's where Johannes was coming from yesterday, because he referenced that good and bad and not quite knowing where to, pigeonhole what Hull could produce tomorrow. But what he did say, and I would be inclined to agree with him, that the fact that they kick off in the bottom 3, that will bring an urgency and intensity, a frenzied, probably opening to the game from the whole side of it, because they know with 15 games left, they need to start winning games of football to get out of that bottom 3. I've had a look at some of their remaining fixtures on the running. They've got Derby, they've got Portsmouth. They're going to be quite scrappy affairs, I'm sure. So it needs to happen. It needs to happen pretty quickly. And that's why I think tomorrow Norwich are going to have to deal with that. And unfortunately, there's occasions this season I can think of where they haven't. They got rolled over at Swansea, if you recall, down there early in the season, where they couldn't handle a very front-footed, aggressive 10, 15 minutes at the start of that game. And that actually ended up deciding the game. I know it was a Mankwa Forsen with an own goal, but Norwich didn't seem to be able to deal with that. They're going to get more of the same tomorrow, and maybe, again, a little bit more on top, given how desperate Hull are for points. So that, for me, is the key tomorrow, that they've clearly got a group of players you would sense that are better than third from bottom, but for whatever reason, that's where they find themselves. But as they've shown recently against Leeds and Sheffield, this is a team who you would underestimate at your peril.
Yeah, certainly a squad that was heavily invested in January. Certainly a lot of players arriving through the door. Probably Louis Barry, the most notable one. You look at that from afar, doing so well at Stockport. I think there was probably a feeling he'd be going upper echelons of the Championship, maybe even to Celtic. I think were one of the teams linked at that point, but ends up at Hull. I don't think he started a game yet. There's maybe a feeling, certainly from the Hull fan I spoke to last night on Terry's Talk, that he might get his opportunity tomorrow night. One winger that they do have, Con, that we've mentioned already, Abu Kamara. Just intrigued to get your take on his move there. Obviously, he pushed his way out the door in the end of that summer window, in sort of difficult fashion under a cloud a little bit. You could sense that frustration from the home crowd in that reverse game at Carrow Road. And, obviously, I don't really agree with some of the comments that were made post-game in terms of Norwich fans' approach to Abu Kamara. But, he certainly got a little bit of stick, 2 goals, 2 assists. Really struggled. I know he had that game against Leeds where he scored twice off the back of being sort of outed a little bit in a press conference setting with Celes before the game. After, I think it was a situation where he posted on one of the Portsmouth players' Instagram accounts after Hull had lost and Portsmouth had got a good result, and I think that didn't go down too well with the fan base. So what have you made of his move? It feels a little bit Johnny Rowe-esque, but it's not quite worked out for him.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. I mean, it is tough, because I understand, like, the act of putting in a transfer request, the theatrics of that is never going to play well with a fan base that is essentially saying, you don't want to be at a club. But in terms of player and process, it's probably the right process to go down. He didn't pull a Johnny Rowe, so to speak, and declare himself, effectively declare himself available to be in a matchday squad. He didn't do that. In fairness, it was a letter, and then it sort of all spiraled from there. And I don't necessarily agree that it was the right move. I can understand from his perspective maybe why he felt it was. I disagree with that, but I think you can understand it. And yeah, it's just a shame more than anything, because particularly the way it's opened up at Norwich with particularly that wide right spot. I think there probably would have been a space for him a lot quicker than maybe he and the people around him would have realised. Admittedly, it looked difficult on the opening day when Christian Fashnak's getting put ahead of you and all of those type of elements. But obviously, he then suffered injuries, and Antti Sienats has played out there for a lot of the season. Oscar Schwartau as well. I think if Abu Kamara was still in the building, he'd have played a lot of football for Norwich City this year. And that, I think, from sort of a developmental perspective, is the frustration. And clearly, as a young player walking into that dressing room, he's walked into a team that aren't playing very well and or obviously in the bottom three and have had a manager dispensed with. I think he's now got a very good one in Ruben Sayers. I've got a friend who's a Reading fan, big Reading fan, and he could walk on water for them, really, the job that he did in very, very difficult circumstances. And you only have to look at what they did against Sheffield United to see there's enough there to suggest that he's a very good coach. Whether he can get them out of it is probably a different debate, but I think for Kamara, it's about consistency and it's about exposure. And he's been exposed to Championship football. It's maybe not gone the way that he liked. There's been some tough learnings on there as well. But I am sure, having seen the way that he came on against Norwich City and performed very well, actually, I think, at Carrow Road after he came off the bench, that he will be eager to make sure that he has a say in the game if he does get involved, whether that's a start or from the bench. So Norwich are going to have to deal with that, and they're going to have to ride that out. And whichever fullback is up against him is going to be challenged. I suspect it will be Callum Fisher. He's going to have to sort of be alert to that particular challenge. So, as for the pantomime elements, they will be there. I'm sure he will get stick again tomorrow. No, it's nowhere near as bad as it was maybe portrayed in other areas. It certainly wasn't anything that I felt was over the line in any stretch of the imagination. But hey, it's opinions, isn't it? But yeah, I'm sure he'll be eager, and Norwich have to frustrate him as they have to frustrate Hull as well. And I mentioned their home record lately has been particularly poor, but I think actually you look at some of the sort of underlying numbers and it suggests that Hull are a better team than the league table suggests at this moment in time. Clearly across the season they haven't been, and Paddy's right, there were clearly challenges with Tim Volter and the style of football that he implemented. Sayers is much more pragmatic, much more balanced. I would expect a really tough game for Norwich City tomorrow, and then it's going to be about sort of quality at the top end of the pitch and whether they can show enough of it with Sainz and Sargent. You would hope, now that they're both back and available, that at some point that's going to click again. So, it's a really interesting game, and I'm sure Abu Kamara will be absolutely determined to make sure that he has a say in it in some form, and hopefully from a Norwich City perspective, that is a frustrating story rather than perhaps the story that you fear may well be written when a player plays a club and that script feels like it's set. So, yeah, it's up to Norwich City to prevent that from happening tomorrow.
Indeed, stepping away from on the field matters to sort of more and off the pitch matters. Season ticket renewals. Of course, the document dropped yesterday in terms of the situation there. A slight price increase around about £1 per game. Here's a sort of matrix of each area and how much you can be expected to pay. There's a few people in the comments sort of asking around season tickets. Killian saying season tickets probably been even more expensive if the club hadn't managed to grab some extra money from Sky, changing those Bristol and Blackburn games. Yeah, not ideal in terms of the travelling elements. Jeffman saying, hello lads, thought on the season ticket price rise, would normally be okay with it, but going up an aged here means I'm paying £560 instead of £250, which, yeah, as you rightly say, quite a hefty rise there, Jeffman. What do you make of that, Paddy? Because obviously Norwich do have one of the more expensive season tickets in the Championship. That's pretty well documented, and over the sort of recent years there has been a minor rise, and it's obviously tight times for all of us at the moment in the way we're having to sort of deal through a living crisis in terms of the costs of everything. So, what do you make of that? Right, wrong? Where do you sit on that?
Well, to be honest, Adam, whenever I'm asked about season tickets, I clearly come from a position where we're very privileged in that we don't have to pay to go and get our Norwich City fix. So, as a result, my opinion on this is probably irrelevant. But I mean, you two lads can come back because you, in former guises, were Norwich season ticket holders, so you're far better qualified than me to talk about this. What I would say is, yeah, I think by common consent are they not the most expensive, the adult senior one, if not in the top two in the Championship? So if that's an accepted label to attach to Norwich and their season ticket policy for full adult prices, then I look at it and say, are they okay? If they're in the top two, are they producing top end Championship football? No, this season. Did they last season? No. So I can understand where there would be certainly people pushing back on those prices, and not even like the as you say, the incremental this season and last. I mean, even in the seasons gone by, to be pegged at that level when they're in the Championship at the very top end of it, I think there's a debate to be had there in terms of the value for money. But then what I would say is it's the supply and demand element of the economics here. They clearly feel, and they would do a lot of analysis. They don't just pluck those figures out of thin air. They would look at the demand. They would look maybe at sort of the pricing that they've done in previous seasons and the take up. And we always know that if there is ever any pushback, when push comes to shove, they'll still be the same, give or take. I think the last set of accounts, they were down 600-700 season tickets. But I don't think even that, primarily probably driven by finances. But I think inside the club, the view was, well, that's actually maybe an opportunity to up the casual fan sort of experience, which is, they're maybe the fans of the future. And how you grab them. Because I know there's a lot about, maybe the demographics around the season ticket base and how do you bring in new generations of fans. But so, I mean, that 950 odd pounds to go and sit in a lounge, they must feel, again, they've done their analysis, there must be enough people willing to pay that to go and have their football in that environment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting those prices out there. And for me, that's what it boils down to. Yes, they've talked about Zoe Webber in her matchday column the other night about clearly across the board in this country, there's added costs now from the NI contributions uptick, and that maybe has been factored into the prices that Norwich have announced this week. But the reality is, I guarantee in 2 or 3 months' time, whatever the initial reaction, there will still be the same or similar uptake for next season. And that will tell, I'm sure, those who matter inside the football club who are involved in these decisions that they've got the pricing right. Because if there was major pushback, then that would be reflected in people not buying their season tickets. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. So, yeah, but for me, the fact that they are that pricey, to me, they're not getting in return top-end Championship football at the moment. So I could see where there would be fans who would be critical of the product and what's being demanded for them to go and view that product. But as I say, you lads are better than me to talk about season ticket prices, having in days gone by, took out season tickets.
Yeah, I think Jeffman's point about kind of the sudden jump from when you're, 20, whatever is 20 now, I think, and you jump to 21 and suddenly you're paying another £300-400 for a season ticket. Obviously, a lot of these sort of individuals of that age category are probably students, and, in a lot of other areas of life, if it's, going to certain, I don't know, theme parks, whatever, you might get a slight student sort of discount based on having that. So it does make it tough for sort of those younger fans as well, Connor, in that category of jumping up. I know I've been in that boat before, I imagine you have as well. So yeah, I can understand certain elements of the fans' frustration over sort of such a significant rise.
Yeah, and it's a rise that's above inflation as well. I think that's a point worth making. That it's still above maybe the costs that maybe naturally will be dragged up anyway. And I think it's more an issue of where football is at more widely. Maybe Norwich City are a part of this, probably, but football is too expensive in this country. Full stop, really. I mean, Norwich are one of the cases for what was it, 11 years or so they froze season tickets. It's only in the last sort of 3 or 4 that there've been increases, and that they've been sort of incremental. But even then, when was the last time that Norwich or any other club said, actually, do you know what, guys, we're going to decrease your season ticket price? It just doesn't happen now because of the way that football works in this country. And I think it would be a little bit more easy to stomach potentially. But I mean, even casual tickets now, if you look at, games that Norwich City have played this season, and even travelling fans, what they cost and what they are charged to come to Carrow Road in sort of the high grade games, you're looking at £36 as an away fan for a ticket at a game of Championship football. Is really poor, I think, to those supporters. And if we're talking about what we're talking, in terms of prices, they made about £8 million last season from season tickets, 4% increase. That gives them about 300,000 more. Is that worth maybe to the club what it's going to cost fans? I would maybe question that a little bit. Could they get it from other areas? Is there a player trading route they could go down? Is there a sponsorship hole that could cover that? I think there is other choices and other levers that potentially could have been could have been pulled, in my view, and maybe they would argue there isn't, and that's fine. Obviously, we're not privy to those decisions, and yeah, it would just be nice. And Paddy's point is right. Forget Championship; it's more expensive than a lot of Premier League clubs at the moment. Norwich City season ticket, and clearly there's more games to factor in, and that has to be a recognition. But if Norwich City are promoted, are they going to say, well, we'll knock however many games are off your season ticket price? They're not going to do that. So, Norwich fans are realistically paying sort of Premier League, mid-table Premier League money, really. And certainly in the last decade or so, they've had 2 seasons where they've been that, and that was Paul Lambert and Chris Hughton back in sort of the early 10s. So it's too expensive as a ticket, but it's a wider issue in football. It's not a Norwich City problem, and Paddy's right. It's the supply and demand for as long as people, it's difficult because when you're emotionally invested in something, you can say it's too much, but equally you can still pay it because it's what you love to do and because you love to watch your football team. And they have almost got people over, not Norwich City specifically, football clubs in this country have supporters over a barrel, really. And it's disappointing that there's not more recognition for, you mentioned the Bristol City game and the other games I'm sure that could be changed before the end of the season. There's not more recognition to the lengths that people go to. And, equally the people around us and people who put a lot of expense into following their football team, that's not even rewarded, maybe even on a one-off basis. I know sometimes they have done in the past where players have paid for travel and stuff, but yeah, I still think that it's too much, and we're still asking for too much from fans, really. And when games are moved at short notice and whatnot in this country, you compare that to sort of the fan experience in Germany or in other countries, and there's so much work to do, I think, in this area. It's pretty shocking, really, I think, how fans are treated on the whole. And as I said, that's not a Norwich City criticism, that's a criticism of football more widely.
Yeah, as Dan says, I do agree with Connor. It's a wider English football culture problem. Obviously, tickets for Utrecht, Breda, €24, under 20 quid. It certainly is. Certainly go to Germany. You can get tickets for 20 quid to watch the Bundesliga. Yet, you're paying north of 30, 40 pounds for a ticket in the Championship. For a pretty grim defeat the other night against Preston. That is a big outlay for individuals. But the challenge probably also comes, Paddy, in that Norwich fans are typically very loyal. You look at the season ticket renewal base every single year, over 20,000. It probably makes it a bit difficult to almost reduce the price because they know that the fan loyalty is always going to be there.
And maybe that is part of the equation that is, behind closed doors when they sit down, which I'm sure there's lots of stakeholders in this process, internally, externally. This is not back of a fag packet kind of maths that they dream up a week before they release these figures. I'd imagine there's probably silos within that football club around the commercial department, and they go off and they really try and crunch the numbers. All I would say on that, I know people Norfolk to their boots, and for them it's family. It's almost what they do as a family on every other Saturday or Friday or whatever the Championship schedulers want to do. But and to give up on that, it would almost be. And when I say, extended family now. So people who've left home and working away or living away, and they come together as a family again, one of the few times maybe in a month to go and again live that experience of unifying something that they love and has been with them as they've grown through their family, and to give that up, and that's an emotional tie, isn't it? And I'm sure that is in the equation for lots of fans who maybe the figures in terms of the renewal rates have got to that point where this is going to bite. We're going to probably have to make some sacrifices in other areas of our lives, but I think in most of those cases, as I say, the fact that it's in your blood. Let's be honest, it's your club, it's your region, you're proud of it, you love it. Those shared memories you've had with your nearest and dearest, and it's very hard to detach that from the hard pragmatism of all the outgoings you get in a given month and what you're going to commit money to as everything feels like it's going up and up and up. So I think that's why, to go back to my previous point, even though it's only a small increment, it comes off the back of they're at a level that is Championship-wide, very, very top echelon, but they will still, as you rightly say, Adam, I think when we get that first data through, it will still be the same or very similar take-up as we have season after season after season, because that supporting your club for a lot of people is more than just, a leisure activity. It's a way of life.
Indeed, we're live now 5 or 10 more minutes. We'll answer a few more of these questions before we round off the show. There's a question here around whether there's any plans for Ben Napper to do a round of interviews before the end of the season. Obviously, last year he did do one post the January window closing. Is there any indication internally from the club that that's going to be a possibility?
It's probably one for Paddy more than me, to be honest. Not that I know, unless he wants to sort of chip in.
No, there's nothing on our side. We've not explored that. That isn't to say we might not have a conversation with the relevant parties, but there's nothing as we sit here this afternoon that is in the pipeline or in the diary. But obviously, when they go through the playoffs and they win at Wembley, then I'm sure he'll be happy to have a chat with all and sundry.
Indeed. A few people sort of mentioning around the playoffs. I know Johannes Torp has mentioned the playoffs being a target, but I feel we shouldn't panic. I've seen a few more around that. I mean, it's probably links into kind of the next window and signing players in their prime. Certainly feels at the moment that Norwich are a little bit short in that area. Look at that sort of squad that was played on Tuesday night. So young, we went through the squad, 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds. That's always going to be a challenge to get them up. Andrew's saying, my worry is that if we keep on being as we are right now, we'll not get back into the top 6. We might as well stick it out being in mid-table and hopefully next season, obviously, I suppose, kick on. Where do you sit on that after this week, guys? Because obviously top 6 was something that was so heavily mentioned probably after the Watford result and, the result against Swansea. And if they'd have won last week against Derby and certainly against Preston, they'd have pushed themselves up into that top 6. There's now a 4-point gap opened up again. And, I think you can sort of see the challenges that they're facing at the moment. Obviously, the adversity in terms of the injuries and various other things aren't helping. But is it still a possibility, I suppose, in these last 14 games that Norwich can get themselves in there? I know we've had this debate whether it's going to be a good thing for the longer haul, but or do you think they're still going to fall short based on what we've seen in the last couple of games?
Yeah, I think they'll fall short. I've said that all season, really. And actually, I think the last week was probably a good sort of marker of where they're at, really, where everyone's maybe feeling that if they were going to kick on, it would be in this week with 2 home games against teams who are struggling a little bit, and they just didn't do it. They didn't have the capacity, the depth, the quality, the answers to break them down. And that was, across the board. That was individuals, that was the head coach, that was his coaching team, that was everybody. They didn't have enough to answer those questions. And we've spoken about the fitness issues that have plagued them as well. So I think, the fact they haven't been in the top 6 at any stage this season kind of tells you what you need to know, to be honest, about where they're at. That doesn't mean it's impossible. And of course, while that 5th and 6th spot are up for grabs, you have to keep going. You have to keep trying. And, frankly, no one's really grasped that at the moment. And there is an opportunity until mathematically it's impossible. So you have to keep pushing for it. Otherwise, we might as well all go home. But I don't think it's the disaster that maybe some other people think that it will be if they don't make the top 6, if I'm honest. I think unless either of you guys want to shout, I think we probably all expect them to be playing Championship football next season if they finish in the top 6 or not. So from my perspective, it's, well, what difference does it make really in the grand scheme of things to be 5th or to be 8th? If our expectation is they're not going to get up anyway, then maybe that is the feeling. And you'd rather they sort of spend this time getting some of those players that hopefully next season are in a better position to push, that are, as a team, they're a bit wiser in terms of the way that they want to play. I think that is probably a better use of the time than, trying to, do what they did last year and put a load of 30-year-olds on the pitch to try and get promoted to the Premier League. And that is probably why there was more criticism of what they were doing last season. And because it was essentially, this time last year, it was top 6 or bust for them. Because if they didn't, then we were going to be in a position where we were here and things were going to have to be ripped up and they were going to have to go in a different direction. And now they are in that different direction, largely because of some of those decisions that have been made, where they're a little bit inconsistent, they're a little bit short in some areas, and they didn't have a lot of assets. So it's easy, I think, when you're where Norwich were at last season, to say you want to play with a load of young players and you want a new style of play. It's a lot harder when you're living it and you're having to experience the push and pull of it and the inconsistencies of it. And, you're where Norwich are at this moment in time. That being said, it does put a lot of pressure on year 2 of this. And I'm sure Torrett will be the first to recognise that, because people are going to, rightly or wrongly, expect a similar sort of trajectory to what happened with Daniel Farke. I don't necessarily think that's the right thing, but that's going to be the expectation. And equally, we've just spoken about there, people pay a lot of money to watch Norwich City in the Championship, so that adds expectation as well, that they should be doing a lot better. So I think actually, Adam, and you've referenced this earlier in the season, I think Sunderland's a really good comparison to Norwich. Last season, they played with a lot of young players. There were a lot of criticism about how young they were, about how inconsistent they were, about how they didn't have a striker. And yes, it took a head coach change, but a lot of the players that finished 16th for them last season are in the team that are in 4th at the moment. It was a few sort of cosmetic changes and a few additions that really helped them to kick on. And I see likewise with Norwich. And I mean, the reality is we just don't know how this ends. We don't know what year 2 looks like. We don't know what year 3 looks like. And so it's easy to say now, that it's okay not to finish in the top 6. And this is I'm probably arguing against myself here, but it's probably okay in the here and now to say, well, tomorrow is going to be better, but we don't actually know that that's going to be the case. And it's going to be time that dictates whether this is, another Weber-Farke cycle and here we go again, or whether it is something that is going to need to take a little bit more time than that. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but I think Torop probably summed it up quite nicely the other day where, if they finish in the top 6, I think it's brilliant. It's great. It'd be a fantastic achievement. Do I think it's the be all and end all? And if they finish 6th this season, it's a success. And if they finish 7th, that it's a failure. No, I don't think it's as black and white as that. Ultimately, it will be about next season, what that looks like, that will dictate whether this year or not was a success. And, the problem is we seem to be in a world where I think people want quick fixes to really complex issues and complex situations. And that's probably throughout society. It's not just football. And it's how willing are people to accept that. And when they're paying top end prices, championship wise, and seeing mid-table football, I can understand why they would be frustrated and why they would want more. And they're certainly entitled to want that for what they're paying. So in many ways, the discussion that we've just had links to probably where we're at the moment. So it's a complex one, but I'm pretty comfortable, I think, with where Norwich City are at the moment. I don't know where Pad's at or where you're at, Adam.
Yeah, they are where I thought they would be, to be honest. A bit of inconsistency, good runs where they look really good. And, I think everything in terms of the product on the pitch is positive. You look at that reverse game against Hull, the home game against Watford. I know they struggled a little bit against Swansea to break them down initially, but when they did, it's pretty clear that they have the quality in the attacking areas to show that. Obviously, there's still a lot of young players in this group that are developing. I think Svartau's only going to get better from here. Sinats, I still feel in the second year will have a more positive impact than what he's having in the first year. So I still think there's a lot of reasons to be positive. And, under Napa, another summer window, clearly Atanasio will be behind the wheel fully by that point. You think they're going to be a little bit more backing. So I'm still more positive, I think, heading into year 2. Do you sort of retain that view, Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's what Torop said to us Tuesday night at post-match, that, and we pushed it out subsequently, haven't we? That, when they're good, this group of players this season, they realistically, he keeps using the word realistically, can challenge for the top 6. And I would agree. But when they're not, when there's injuries, unavailabilities, and they slip off that, then they're nowhere near it, let's be honest. So, and he went on to add in that answer that, so to not make the top 6 in that context, for everything that Connor's mapped out about what this is and where we are in this cycle, very early on still, wouldn't be failure, because you would think there would be enough circumstantial evidence for fans, hopefully majority of fans, to see that there is progress, there is positivity, those young players you've mentioned as well, another transfer window to come if they get that right, and then kick on from there. So, yeah, no, I think I wouldn't veer too far from from Torop's analysis, that if it all came together with a fair win, then yes, between now and the end of the season, they could make the top 6. But the reality is, as we sit here discussing who's unavailable for tomorrow and possibly the next week and the next week, then they're not probably going to have all those favourable currents. So as a result, for me, 8th to 12th, I think, finishing position.
Yeah, and finally, before we get score predictions, just an intriguing question here from Dan around refereeing and I suppose where that's at the moment in the Championship. I know this could be a whole nother podcast and we could be on it for 2 hours, so we won't go into too much depth, but watching the highlights showed another dreadful performance from the referee. It's been so common, but how do we improve this? It's not like that in the Netherlands. I think Germany, I feel like the officiating is a lot better over there. So, Connor, how does the English game get to the bottom of this? Because this is not a problem just in the Championship. This feels like it's across all divisions now. Even the Premier League, there's always debatable points coming up on these kind of shows. You see a couple of days on, look at this decision that was wrong. So, is there any way around that?
Yeah, there is, and I think it's the culture around officiating, isn't it? Because it's a death cycle really that it's in. Because the more you criticise, the more you get into a situation where people are going to call for technology and intervention from elsewhere. That hasn't really worked. but also the more abuse you have at Sunday League level. I mean, there was a clip last week. I know me and Paddy spoke about this of an under-10s game where there's people fighting and parents fighting. That wasn't necessarily directly linked to a referee, but we've seen. I've played a game before where a very young referee was chased into a car park by somebody. It's a culture that's endemic, and it's really difficult to know how to fix that and how to get people into refereeing and wanting to referee. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't know if either of you guys would, because why would you want to go and spend your Sunday morning at a park getting abused, when you're giving up your own time and when it's crucial? And ultimately, until you break that cycle, we're not going to get officials coming through, and we're not going to get a period where the quality improves. Because you're right, Adam, it's been bad this season. As maybe I say every year, maybe it feels like every year, but definitely this feels more marked in terms of it feels a really low standard this year of match officials that have refereed at a championship level. Gavin Ward, who was the referee in midweek, has been a pretty consistent championship official for a decade or so. I think therein is some of the problem. That's somebody who's clearly not up to the level, really. You look at some of the things he missed, and I'm not talking about from a Norwich perspective. We mentioned the Nunez tackle, the one from Shane Duffy on Holmes. Clearly, the lad suffered a really bad injury off the back of that, and Shane Duffy's come out and apologised subsequently. I don't think there was any intent behind it, but the fact that he wasn't booked for that challenge compared to maybe what then Cianats was booked for in the second half, it's hard to come to any other conclusion than it's a really low standard. But that's because the culture and where we're at in the game is an issue. And you look at some of the stuff that Michael Oliver has had to deal with, who is probably the best in this country in the last few weeks and whatnot, because of the decisions that he's made. It's why would anyone want to go in that when families are being abused and there's the social media element of it and whatnot. I just don't until we break that, until we change that, I'm not really sure how it will get better, and therein is the problem, I think. So as a game, everybody involved in it needs to find a solution, and that's very difficult because there's emotions in it, and people clearly, rightly or definitely wrongly, feel that every time a referee takes to their pitch, they're refereeing against their team. Every single team thinks that, and they're not. Errors are human errors a lot of the time, and it's difficult, but it does feel like the standard's lower, and we all as a game collectively need to source a solution to that, because if it goes on like this, the game's going to be in a really bad place.
Yeah, so James Linnington has a good game tomorrow afternoon at the MKM Stadium. I think it's probably got to that point in the show. Score prediction time. There's a few people asking for them. Predictions is what Elliot's asking us. There's a few people already in here. We've got a 1-0 Norwich City win. Josh Sargent with the winner. Pretty confident as well that we'll beat Hull, but certainly won't be easy. Hanno going for a Norwich 2, Hull 2. I don't know if there's anybody else in the comments, but Paddy, how do you see this one tomorrow? Obviously, I mentioned Hull having the worst home record in the league. Norwich have been more positive on the road. This year, certainly the win at Luton, the win at Watford. How do you see it all unfolding?
Well, it's very tricky. I mean, we're obviously a few hours out from that team news dropping. If McLean was in the 11, then I would be more inclined to feel Norwich could probably get the result, the right end of the win result, but feels like that's a 50-50 call. And given the other issues against, as we've said already, this is going to be, I think, a Hull team who will look at, let's be honest, they'll look at a Norwich team coming off the back of 1 point from the last 2 home games and will think they are ripe for the taking. If we can get at them, go for the jugular early, pin them back, a lot of young players, and roll over the top of them. That's what they'll be thinking. So for me, it's probably got draw written on it, 2-2.
Yeah, Andy going for a Hull 2-0 win. Dan with a 0-0. Norwich have won all of their last 4 games against Hull, Connor, but in terms of the MKM, up until last season, they hadn't won there since 2007. So where's your head at moving into Saturday?
Yeah, certainly the stats around midfield and whatnot that we reeled off at the start of the show would probably pit it against Norwich, really, in terms of an outcome. I agree with Paddy. I think it's going to be a really tight game. I think it's one of those, as so often we say in the Championship, where you could quite easily see all 3 results. So when it's like that, I'm always inclined to sit on the fence. So I'll join Paddy and go for a draw. I'm going to go with 1-1.
Yeah, I think I'm probably with you boys in terms of a draw. It just feels like it's got that written all over it. So it means we're going to be totally wrong and there's going to be a high scoring game and one team's going to go and get the win. But there we go. That's why you guys come and join us on these shows for our great predictions. With that, I think we're going to sign off. This lunchtime we're going for over an hour. Of course, thank you for all your comments and interactions. We couldn't get through all of them. Obviously, we do try and work our way through. But when there's so many of you in here, we do appreciate all the comments. So thanks for joining us. Of course, we've got lots of good content across our channels. On YouTube, we've got Johannes Off-Top's full press conference from yesterday. So his sort of thoughts and the issues around midfield are all in there. We've got tactics board up this morning from Sam. So a little bit more of a dive into the tactics of Hull and maybe why the long balls didn't work the other night. I spoke to a Hull fan last night. So a little bit more of a sort of deeper dive on the Tigers and how their season's going is on YouTube as well. Of course, got all the written stuff over on the Pink and Plus app. You can take out a subscription to that. We think it's pretty good value for money. So if you haven't already joined us on that growing community, why not go and give it a little look and take it out for a month because, I think you'll probably enjoy the content. Obviously, plenty of games coming up as well. I think there's another 14 to go. Some of those on Friday nights, which you might not be able to get to Bristol anymore. So, we'll be there. We'll have it all covered for you. So, of course, we'll be at the MKM tomorrow, 2 p.m. for Team News Live. So join us then to see what we get. So let's hope Norwich City can get back to winning ways after a couple of disappointing results on recent days in terms of the home form. So we'll see what we get. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime. Of course, enjoy your weekend. If you're making the trip to Hull, safe travels and hopefully you're rewarded for your loyalty.